Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Fed Up, your no BS nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Marie, certified personal trainer and nutrition specialist, working with clients since 2014. After swimming up diet culture's bullshit stream for so many years, I am fed the absolute up with how miserable it's making people feel when we are supposed to be getting healthier. This podcast is here to help you gain your sanity back so you can stop yo-yoing once and for all and finally learn how to trust yourself so you can enjoy food again without fear or shame while still getting to your health goals. My aim is to teach you how to detect the BS in not just the food and diet industries, but in all realms of life, because I know that, like me, we are all just a little fed up. So without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to episode 40 of the Fed Up podcast. I am so excited you're here because today is how you can start to really learn how to detect the bullshit in specifically the health and wellness industries, but also in honestly, a lot of marketing across the spectrum here. So obviously, we're going to be talking about my wheelhouse, which is the health, nutrition, wellness, fitness, all of that. But you can use these tactics to be able to tell if someone is full of crap, even when you don't quite understand the physiology behind it or like the science behind it, because marketing is real tricky nowadays. You can almost not tell if somebody is full of crap because one, everyone has credentials, or, oh, they must have credentials because they're, really popular on social media, or they speak with authority and they call themselves doctor. And sometimes they even use, they'll explain the science mostly correctly. And then they just make these quantum leaps to la la land. And here are some of the ways that you can begin to really approach things with extreme skepticism and the red flags that should be woo in your brain when you are presented with this content. So the first underlying marketing message, the overall theme of this person's marketing or of this content will be fear or shame based. And it's not going to be sometimes obvious, but when you all of a sudden are like, oh my gosh, should I really be worrying about this? And your natural first instinct is to be afraid of something or to all of a sudden realize, oh my gosh, this is what's wrong with me. And that is your first alarm bell that should be going off. And it's pretty obvious, like sex sells, but fear sells more and better than sex does. So the doom and gloom marketing or the this is what you've been doing wrong marketing is ultimately the biggest seller of, listen, I have a solution for you, because you're afraid. And they target a lot of times women or mothers or people who are more susceptible and more vulnerable because we are in vulnerable states. I hate when I see people preying on infertility because that is a sensitive time. It is a sensitive topic, and you are naturally going to be afraid of a lot of stuff because you're trying to achieve an outcome, getting pregnant or keeping a pregnancy. And that comes with a lot of emotion. Or again, like your children's health or whatever it may be. The fear is the first marketing tactic that, again, should red flag right up. And a couple of things first. When you are approaching social media or content or even, advertisements on TV or in between the Hulu marketing and things like that, the real credentials are tricky because everyone will call themselves doctor and then they'll be speaking about something like nutrition. But when you dig a little deeper, it's a doctorate degree means you have a PhD in something, or you're a doctor of law or a doctor of chiropractic. It does not mean you are a doctor in that specialty. And nutritionally speaking, Everyone thinks they are an expert on nutrition because everybody eats. And MDs don't even have training in nutrition. It's like a couple of chapters in a book. It is not even like a required class in pre-med or in medical school, FYI. So the first thing is, look for credentials. I mean, and again, it could be tricky because, this is a doctor, and then they put on the white lab coat or they have a stethoscope in all of their videos. So it can be a little tricky to determine, this person is a functional medicine doctor or they're a naturopathic doctor. That means that they're a doctor. But again, I want you to listen to episode 39, my last episode, where I talked about naturopaths and how they're ultimately exploiting you. Not all of them, but a lot of them, especially the ones in the online space. And when you look at doctors, there are specialists, oncologists, endocrinologists, immunologists, because those specific fields are so complex and they're so intensive that you have to have another 2 to 3 to 4 years of specialty, not an MD, not just like a regular you passed your medical board exam and you see general patients. There's a reason why your MD has to refer out to other specialists. And I know that there are some people who are like, well, that's dumb. I have to always get a referral and blah, blah, blah. It's because these systems in our body, there is an entire degree to learn how the endocrine, which is your hormonal system, works. So people talking about hormones who are not an endocrinologist usually don't know very much about what they're talking about. And given that, again, an MD might understand very basic physiology of hormone function, of course, there is an entire other world that they are not even exposed to in their regular training because it's a specialty. There's a reason there's a specialty. And so when you look for someone's credentials, don't just look for the term or the word doctor or doctorate, because again, you could be a doctor of chiropractic talking about nutrition, and that has nothing to do with their specialty. And I know that this is part of we live in a society where credentialism can also be kind of wary, because you could have somebody who is a doctor or a specialist in something and they're still full of crap because people are greedy and people want to sell you things. And so, of course, look for the credentials, look for the fear and shame-based marketing tactics. That alone should give you enough to go by on whether or not this person is full of crap. But let's talk about the messaging that a lot of the time they will be talking about. Real experts speak in nuance. They speak in it depends, because we know, I'm going to say I'm not an expert, but people who understand the scientific process understand that scientific evidence is not a one-size-fits-all. It is not black or white. There is so much nuance. There is so much the body of evidence either supports or does not support a certain hypothesis. And we're not going to be cherry-picking data to prove a point where there were 6 people in this study and see what we saw. No, you want to be looking at randomized human-controlled trials, which means they take out as much bias as they can between the people actually in the study and the researchers. So double-blinded means the research doesn't know or the researchers don't know and the participants don't know. And they give them a placebo. And the placebo is so important in these human-controlled trials because when people believe something is working or not working, you will have a real physiological phenomenon. So scientists know this. That does not mean that their product doesn't work or that we shouldn't, consider that our mind is really powerful, because it is. So we consider placebo because it does have a real effect on your results. Now, you can do a bunch of studies with a very small population, and then you have to look at, we need bigger population sample sizes because the people who are responding to participate in these studies, the way that people recruit these people to participate in the studies, and there are certain things that are not ethical to do in a randomized control trial, so we rely on observational studies. And this is where like correlation comes into play. So you can look at what is more of a correlation or an observation that we see. Well, X, Y, and Z leads to an increase observation of X, Y, and Z outcomes. Those are really hard to prove, and real experts are not going to say, well, this causes this. No, because we know that humans and lifestyle and environment and genetics, they all play a role, and it is hard to pinpoint one thing. So non-experts or people trying to sell you some BS will talk in absolutes. They will talk in causality, and they will say, this is the reason why you feel like this. And granted, sometimes it's true, right? Sometimes that could be the case. But a lot of times they will not give nuance. They will say, this is your solution. This was your problem. And I have the solution, right? You just need to take this supplement. You just need to eat this one way. And a lot of times they take out the nuance and the individual because it doesn't go with their message. So let's talk about very basic here, the carnivore diet. There are certain individuals with autoimmune disorders, and I mean like real hardcore autoimmune diagnosable disorders like rheumatoid arthritis or ankylosing spondylitis, not like, well, I'm kind of fatigued and I break out in rashes, like not even MCAS or like fibromyalgia, because those are not studied. We do not know a lot about that information. It's more of a neuroscience type of thing. Anyway, when you look at someone with ankylosing spondylitis, there's a doctor who discovered that immune disorder is where your body starts to attack and fuse together your spinal column. Well, there's a bacterium in your gut that feeds off starch. And when that bacterium is starved by not eating starch for these individuals, their disease goes into remission. So I could take that and then say, well, starch is bad. And if you have autoimmune disorders, you should cut out all starch. And that black and white, like, well, your starch is the reason you're having inflammation. The starch, blah, 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 blah. No. Backpedal here. Pause. For a specific individual with AS, I might actually recommend a starch or low starch diet and see if their symptoms improve. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and yet you have a lot of carnivores or people who claim to eat carnivore and their autoimmune disease went away or they went into remission or something like that, and then they now make these blanket statements to every other autoimmune disorder, which like type 1 diabetics also have, like, that's considered an autoimmune disorder. That is not going to be the same solution for somebody with ankylosing spondylitis or for somebody with childhood rheumatoid arthritis. Like, those are different autoimmune disorders, and there is not a one-size-fits-all approach, but they will speak in absolutes. A lot of times, too, this absolute or the causality, they will speak from personal anecdote or personal experience. So a lot of naturopaths, by the way, speak this way. They'll say, well, I had all these immune issues, or I had Lyme's disease, or I had all this chronic pain, and then I discovered this. And now I'm sharing it with you, and it'll work for you if it worked for me. And like, again, real scientists know that that is not an accurate way to be giving people information based on your own personal experience. Now, you can get on Reddit and read thousands of personal experiences that are similar to your own. That's the whole collective human experience that we have. You're going to find, what do they call it, confirmation bias, or again, you're going to relate to people with your similar symptoms, and they could be from completely different reasons, but you experience same symptoms. And that is something else that they are going to do. Number one is they're going to be speaking in absolutes and causality. And number two, they are the only ones who have the solution. They will often try to discredit the Western medicine, or like, doctors won't tell you this, or like, your doctor says your labs are fine, but they're not. And they're selling the solution, right? You need to be taking these Primal Queen supplements. You need to be taking, my supplement because it's the best. And sometimes they don't even say that in the actual content. It's until you go to their comments and then that's what they're recommending. And whether they have a discount code or they actually own the supplement line. And I'm not even saying that like you can't start your own supplement line, but like a lot of them have their own supplement line or their own discount codes. So it is working off commission. It is just trying to sell you the solution, which they have to put more money in their pockets. Guess what? I don't make any money from telling someone to go lift weights a few times a week, eat more fiber, get more sleep. Now, I sell my coaching services, sure, but I don't claim to have a one-size-fits-all program because it doesn't. It is so individualized per client. And some of my advice that works really well for one client does not work for another client because they're in a completely different headspace. They have a completely different lifestyle. They have different problems, even if the symptoms are the same. These are the people who are trying to tell you that, your metabolism is broken or your body does this because of this. You're fatigued because you're hypothyroidism. And who cares if you've actually been diagnosed, right? They're going to just list all the symptoms. And it's always like fatigue and, bloating and you have headaches and you don't have any motivation. Like it's all these things that like 90% of humans experience, some worse than others. And again, they have the solution, right? Or they are trying to tell you that you're broken, your hormones are dysregulated. I was just stalking someone's website because again, my skepticism hat was on and I'm like, I think you're full of crap. And guess what? They're like 90% of women don't even know their hormones are dysregulated. Like, what? Like, okay. So again, it's like, well, you don't know, your doctors don't know, no one's going to tell you this, but I have the answer. So again, your red flag should go up. Number 3 is they are going to, again, it's a fear-based mechanism. And so they're going to make things very overcomplicated. And then they're going to oversimplify. So this happens a lot when they want to confuse you. They're talking above you. They're spewing out physiology, and some of it might actually be correct. And then the general population is not going to understand because it's so complicated. And then they're going to isolate one variable that's going to fix all of it. So one creator I saw a couple of weeks ago was trying to explain, actually, this isn't just alone to him, there's many that do this, that insulin is your body's storage hormone, which is true. When you are fed, insulin responds, rises, and that is going to tell your cells to uptake glucose and be able to convert it to ATP, which is your energy. And when you have too much food, it's going to store. But you cannot store if your cells do not get the energy it needs, which means insulin is a key factor to be able to store energy, aka fat. But also, this is why type 1 diabetics and type 2, but when they drop, like they don't have any insulin, right? Because their pancreas does not produce insulin. That's type 1 diabetics. You do not have the pancreatic function to produce insulin. They will have rapid weight loss or they just can't gain weight. Now, if you talk about like type 1 diabetics to general population or people, it's not insulin itself that stores fat. You cannot store fat without an excess of energy. So using type 1 diabetic pathophysiology of insulin is your storage, without insulin you lose weight, to the general population, that is not correct. I mean, again, it might be correct, but it's not safe and it's not at all what you need to do. Oh, just don't eat, right? Like don't have any food in your system and then you'll lose weight, which obviously means that you're in a calorie deficit. Now, one of the creators that I'm talking about was like, see, if you just keep your insulin low, you can have as many calories as you want because your insulin is low. What? What does that mean? Insulin being low means your cells are starving and that glucose stays in your blood or gets excreted out your urine because it cannot get into your cells. That is not an ideal state. Okay? And again, if we're talking about people with type 1 diabetes, that is why they will often pass away really young if they don't get insulin therapy. So using that to just talk to the regular population about well, keep your insulin in check, blah, blah, blah. That is fear-based marketing. And it is only using about half correct physiology. And sometimes what happens is, you get someone some insulin therapy and then they gain weight. That is not a bad thing. That means they're not dying. And guess what? That means that their muscle cells and brain cells are able to be fed. And that's how you function. So using it as a weight loss tactic is freaking dangerous, but also doesn't apply to the general population. You cannot increase your calories without increasing your insulin. But then, of course, they'll go into this whole well, that's why you need keto. Your body creating ketones is a survival mechanism because your brain can only use glucose. And then in periods of starvation or in periods of low carb intake, your body over millions of years of evolution has figured out that, we can use ketone bodies because otherwise we're going to die. So again, not an ideal state. It's just kind of what happens. So when you notice that they are overcomplicating, they're talking all this physiology, and then they oversimplify it with one variable or one isolated mechanism, it's also tricky because when you look at physiology, there are pathways, right? Like I just mentioned, the insulin pathway. You digest some carbohydrates, carbs get digested into glucose molecules. Glucose goes into your bloodstream or to your liver, and then insulin is released in order to tell your cells what it actually does is insulin is the hormone that then binds to certain cells, and it brings a glucose transporter that hides in the middle of the cell called GLUT4 to the surface of the cell to then let glucose into the cell. And then you go into the Krebs cycle, or you are able to digest the glucose and in turn create ATP. Remember in school they said mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria is what is taking glucose and then producing ATP, which is like your cellular currency. It is the only thing that is energy in your body. So when you understand that physiology and then you explain it somewhat accurately, but really you're using type 1 diabetics as your example, and then you're just preaching to the masses, no, honey, that is not how that works. So that's what I'll leave you with. Those are some 3 major things. 4 really, if you look at the fear-based marketing and the lack of credentials. That's going to be your number 1 indicator. Number 2 is that they're talking in absolutes. They're talking in causalities. They're not using nuance. They're not using an individualistic approach. They are also selling you the solution that no one else knows about. No one's going to tell you about this. Your doctor is wrong. Listen to me, random TikTok influencer, instead. And then again, they are going to overcomplicate the physiology and oversimplify the physiology. Kind of one and the same there. So I want you to put on your bullshit detectors this week and realize most of the content out there, if 1 or 2 or 3 of their content messaging is kind of based around this, or their entire profile is, again, your hormones are dysregulated and you don't even know it, they're probably full of crap. If they are not an endocrine specialist, let's call it that, or if they are not a oncologist talking about cancer, if they are not a registered dietitian talking about nutrition, or someone that you can tell has done some real education in that subject, I would just kind of take what they say with a grain of salt. If you find yourself thinking you have more things wrong with you than you realized, you have this fear, this shame, this, oh my gosh, you're totally right. I need to fix this right now. And they have the answer. I'm going to order all these supplements. Red flag, red flag, red flag. Right now, there's this trend of telling a whole bunch of women that they are perimenopausal, and you could be perimenopausal when you're only 30 years old because you're fatigued and you're irritable and you can't sleep. So you're perimenopausal even though you're only 31. Okay. There is like one symptom that actually diagnoses you in the criterion of being perimenopausal, which is the period of time before you're menopausal, and it is having irregular periods. If you are not having irregular periods, you are probably not in perimenopause. And number two, if you are having irregular periods and it is not attributed to extreme stress or extreme leanness and starvation, when you do not get enough fat, enough carbs, enough calories, enough energy in your body, when you're like drastically losing weight or when you're really lean, like an athlete, or again, you're just, not eating, you might have irregular periods. That is not perimenopause. Just because you're a little irritable does not mean you're in perimenopause, and maybe even a lot irritable. But we want to look at other factors. Are you eating regularly? Are you sleeping regularly? Are you turning off your screens at a decent time? Are you spending within your means and putting up boundaries within your life so that you're not under extreme chronic stress all the time? Like, there are these other factors, but TikTok will say you're perimenopausal at 30 years old, and I have supplements for you. So that should be your red flag. But anyway, I hope this helps you to be able to sort through it a little bit easier, even when you don't understand the full science or the full scope of what they're talking about. Again, that should be a little bit of a red flag. Real experts or people who want to actually educate you are not going to try to confuse you in order to speak over you and speak above you and then overly simplify it to where you need whatever they're selling you. So that's another thing, like TikTok, Instagram, like Facebook even, it's the most polarizing content that gets engagement. So they're going to make wild claims. They're going to make, you afraid, or they're going to say something that they know is kind of wrong so that a bunch of people correct them in the comments. So look out for that engagement bait, as they call it, right? And start thinking like a detective. Start thinking like a scientist. And I hope this helps. So speak to you guys next week. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks so much for being here, friends. If you enjoyed this episode, please screenshot and tag me over on Instagram or leave a 5-star review wherever you are listening from. Your support means the world to me and only helps me get the no BS news out to more people. If you're interested in working with me in nutrition or personal training, check out my programs and courses on my website at kaylamariefitness.com and on Instagram at KaylaMarie_fit. See you next week.